Okay, so now it's time to make the player climb this staircase. First of all, I want to show you a couple of things. Uh, Go here to my animation. I imported a new sprite from my move animation. So if you go to player and go to move here, you can set all the sprites here from 0 to 31 and put the FPS speed to 24. Also, I already written a script for the curtain here because let me show you something. If I put this to 0 and run the game, there is a small problem here where the player uh, goes in front of the curtain but cannot go behind. We want this curtain to change dynamically according to the player position. So to do that, we will define a horizontal line where the z-index of this curtain will change dynamically according to the player position. So if I set this to 2, you will see that when the player reaches this position in the y-axis, the curtain will change dynamically and go behind or in front of the player. So you see here I'm behind the curtain, and when I move here, I go in front of the curtain. So the way this works is we have this script here. It's called alternate z-index, and it is a script for general purposes for objects in the scene that have a variable relative position to the player. That means that sometimes they go in front of the player or behind the player according to where the player is. So what that does is we define a low index and a high index that we want this particular object to take, and this is a Y threshold, which is the horizontal line where the player will reach and the object will change dynamically. So here we say that if the player position, the Y player position is greater than the Y threshold, so that means that the player comes closer to the camera or is lower on the screen, that are horizontal line, then we want to set the Z index of this particular object to be the low index. So that means that the object will get behind the player. But if the player instead is higher than the horizontal line, so the C position is lower than threshold, then we want to set the Z index to high index. So the object will get in front of the player. So here I'm setting the Y threshold to 9023, so that means that when my player crosses that line, right now my player is on this position. So when a player goes lower on the screen or higher in value in Y, and it goes somewhere here, then the curtain will take the 0 value for the Z index. But if my player goes higher, so I want him to be behind the curtain, then the curtain will take the high index and will be in front of the player. So with that being done, let's define how the player will behave when he wants to climb a vertical surface. So right now I have a script from a player which is called move along path, and it's called when the player is on move state. But what about when the player is climbing? We have a state for the player called climb, and we want to do uh, a similar thing that we're doing for the move along path, because when the player is moving vertically or climbing, is actually moving vertically. So we can make the player behave as he would normally behave in the move state, but instead of having the move animation, he would have the climb animation. So I'm going to create a new function which will be called climb along path, and it will be very similar to the one I have above. I will copy paste all this code And here I want to change some things. So first of all, this we don't need these things, but instead of flipping the sprite, we want to play an animation for climbing up and animation for climbing down. So how I'm going to do that is going to my player and create a new animation called climb. And here I'm going to pass a rough animation that I made some sprites here for the climb. Better set the FPS speed to 18, it will work best. And we can play this animation in reverse for climbing down. So here, I'm going to say that, a second, set this to idle. Okay, so I'm gonna say that if starting point, now I care only for the Y values. So I'm going to change these values from X to Y and say here that if my y-axis of the player current position is greater than the first point in my path, the y position of the first point in my path, then that means that the player is lower on the screen and it's going to a higher point. So it means that he's moving upwards. So I'm going to play the climb animation normally, but instead, if the case is in reverse, so that means that the player is higher and he wants to go lower, then I will play the climb animation but set this value to true, so he will play the climb animation in reverse. So now we have a new function for the climb state, but we have not declared yet when will this function will play. So we're going to say here that if the player is in the climb state, then is going instead climb along path. So now in order to make my player climb, I want to send a signal wherever my player is currently in a vertical surface and it's going upward or downwards. So first of all, I'm going to expand my navigation area. Because my character is moving in a similar way as if he was moving, then I'm going to put also the vertical areas in the navigation polygon. So I'm reallocating these points here for my navigation area where my player will be able to move. And now I want to define an area where the player will be climbing. So I'm going to create an area 2D and call it climb area. And here I need a collision shape to define where the climb area will be. And here I'm going to put a rectangle and take this from here and put it. I'm going to change the Z index so I can see it. And from here, adjust it so that it covers the staircase. Make sure that the boundaries of this shape overlap the navigation polygon, or else we might have a very small area here in the edges where the player will be moving instead of climbing. Now what I also want to do is create some sort of collider for my player in order to detect when the player reaches this point. So for the player I'm going to create a kinematic body and call it player body. And for that body I need a collider, so I'm going to add again a collision shape, and this will be the player legs. or rather player feet, because this collider will only affect or only contain the fit area of my player. So here, create a new shape and adjust the collider to match the fit of the player. Because I want the climb animation to trigger when the feet of my player reaches this point and not the head of the player or other part of the body, because he might start climbing in weird positions. So now by having these shapes, I want to send a signal for when my player is about to climb or when he's about to stop climbing. So I'm going to go here to my climb area and go here to node and signals. And from here, I want a signal, send a signal for when a body has entered the area. So I'm going to click, right click here and click connect. And with a connect, I want to connect it to the control. So the control here now is going to take a signal from this climb area whenever a body crosses its border. So whenever a body enters this area, the control will receive the signal. So at first, he doesn't care which body has entered this area, but I'm going to say that if the body, the specific body that entered the area, and get the name of it, and if it does not equal the player feet, so this is a string here. So if the body is not the player feet, then I don't want to do anything. I'm going to return from this function. But if it is the player feet, that means that we want the player to climb. So we're going to say that player and use a new variable which is called isClimbing and set it to true. So I'm going to declare this variable for my player, and it's going to be called here. Let's put it here, and it's going to be is climbing, and of course it will be a bool, so a boolean. So here in the func ready, I'm going to say in the start of my game that the player is not climbing. But now I also want to see when my player is exiting this area. So I'm going to also send a signal from here from the climb area. I'm also going to send a signal for when a body is exiting uh, this area. So I'm going also to send the signal to the control and say here again, copy paste it, and right now if my player has exit this area, then set the is climbing to false. So with these two signals, I'm only changing a flag for the player, which is saying if he's climbing or is not climbing, but I'm not yet changing the state of the player. So the state of the player, I'm going to change it here. So whenever I get an input, I want the player to start moving, but now I'm only saying that the player will do the move animation or the move state. But I have two situations where the player will either move or climb. So I'm going to say that if player is climbing, if he's not climbing, then move. But if he does climb, then climb. So this will call this function here the change state. I don't need to do anything here for the climb rather than actually changing the state, because I'm changing the animation here, and I cannot change the animation here because I might have a problem where the signal will not arrive fast enough, and the path will be the old path, and so it cannot detect whether the player wants to go upwards or downwards. So I want to do it inside of the climb along path function. Now, if I click play, actually before hitting play, first of all, change this to the name to be the player body, because he's detecting the kinematic body rather than the collision shape. And here again, we're changing this to the player body. And now, one more thing we want to do is to change the state when he's currently in a move or the climb state. Because if we do this right now here and click, for example, here, the player will start moving, and when he reaches here, he will not start climbing, because right now we're only changing the state with the input, but we also want to change the state in between the movement of the player. So when he's moving, or when he's running or walking, something like that, he might want to start climbing at some point. So I'm going to go here and say that if the player is climbing, then change the state to climb, and correspondingly, if the player is not climbing here, then go to move. So now if I click play, you'll see that the player will start climbing and also play the climb animation in reverse, if you notice it very carefully when he's going up or down. Now the problem is that when he stops in between, he's going to the normal idle animation, but we want to define an climb idle animation when he will be looking like he's standing still while climbing. So I'm going to my player animation sprite and create a new animation and call it climb idle, or idle climb, or climb idle, whatever you want. And here I'm just going for now to grab the first sprite of my climb animation, and this will be my idle climb for now. And with having that for the player, I'm just going to go to the change state and see whenever I'm going to the idle state, I just want to check if the player is climbing or not. So if he's not climbing, then okay, play the idle animation like you would normally do. But if he is climbing, then just play the climb idle. And now, if I click play, you can see that I'm going here and I stop, or rather doing something very strange. Yeah, because I hadn't changed the not statement here, so the player was doing something very strange. And now I click play again, and you will see that my player stops in between the stairs with the climb idle. And that would be for my climb functionality of the player. Of course, there are still some issues we need to solve. For example, if the player is staying here in the edge, he's looking a little bit weird. We might have an animation where the player reaches this point, the animation snaps him to the top of the stairs almost instantly, so it doesn't look weird. But rather than that, the movement is quite okay. The good thing with it is that we can stop here, for example, and decide that we want to go back and change the state again. We might need to fix the colliders a little bit, the collision shapes, so to define this climbing area a little bit better, but it's quite satisfying for now. Hello, my name is Kilo. I'm the director of an indie game development team called Dimension Omega, where we're currently working on a project called Astra, which is a 2D platformer Metroidvania game. Considering following us on Instagram, where we will be uploading content of our progress. Thank you so much for watching, and please like and subscribe, it really helps support the channel.